Greetings, everybody! May the Force be with you. Welcome to our second event for Making Monsters on Discovery Day Online with the Alf Museum. I am the Collections Manager and Outreach Coordinator and Jedi Master of the Jedi Archives, Gabriel Santos, and I am very, very excited and honored today to be joined by renowned science illustrator and creature designer Terryl Whitlatch. Hello, Terryl!
Hello, how are you?
I am doing very, very well today. How are you doing?
I am doing, I'm happily doing well too, and very happy to be here. Very honored to have been asked to participate.
Well, thank you so much. This is so cool to have you on here to really talk about how science and science illustration influences things people may not realize in science fiction and fantasy. A lot of your work has, you've done both, correct?
Yes, uh-huh.
That's awesome. For those of you who are just joining us, today Tara will be giving a little presentation about her work as a creature designer and science illustrator, and afterward we will be doing a Q&A with her. So if you have burning questions for Terrell, put them in the chat and we'll ask them later. So really quick, let me introduce our speaker. Terrell is joining us. Where are you joining us from today?
I am joining you today live from Albany, Oregon.
Awesome. Um, Let's see. So, Terryl Whitlatch's career has spanned over 25 years. She has worked with many major studios, such as Lucasfilm and Disney, and effects houses as a highly sought after creature and concept designer. She is also the creator and illustrator of three books: The Wildlife of Star Wars, a field guide, The Katurin Odyssey, and the newly released Animals Real and Inspired. Two new titles, The Science of Creature Design and Principles of Creature Design, were released in November 2015. Terrell is also a contributor to the fantasy and science fiction illustration blog Muddy Colors and a frequent guest lecturer and workshop instructor at many venues. Partnering with Copic Markers Imagination International, Terrell is also the creator of a new cutting-edge course in creature design, Tales of Amalfia, that teaches both real animal and imaginary creature design simultaneously. She is an artist in residence at the Imagine International Incorporated Studios, where she focuses on both real animal and imaginary creature visualization and illustration. Sorry, I flubbed those words up a little bit. I'm a little bit nervous and excited to be doing this today.
No
um,
worries.
for those of you who may not know, somehow I am a huge fan of Star Wars, which is just one of the many amazing things that Terrell has done, and this is one of my favorite books that Terrell has ever created, The Wildlife of Star Wars, and has been a huge influence in my career as both a paleontologist and educator. So that's why I kind of dressed up as a Jedi today and have Naboo behind me. So, Terrell, what has been some of the things that's changed for you lately as a science illustrator since the pandemic happened?
Well, for me personally, not too much because as an illustrator and designer, I've been social distancing for like decades now. So I guess the greatest change for myself personally was seeing how it affected other people who are not used to this sort of stay in your house and be by yourself type of lifestyle all day. And so that I think that's the thing that I've noticed the most.
Yeah. For like a lot of your work, have you been doing a lot of new projects since the last year, or have you been kind of just working on things that have been in the wheelhouse since?
I would say both. I've been putting the finishing touches on a new book authored by paleontologist Dr. Michael Habib, whom one of your colleagues and so that's now in the hands of the publisher. And at the same time, I'm working on a pretty large scale video game, which I can't say anything at all about, except that it's very cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and other things as well, various miscellaneous projects, and which I can't say a whole lot
All that's fair.
here, but they all form the umbrella, in the entertainment industry. So yes, there we go.
Well, that's exciting. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and you can start your presentation. For all of you watching at home, if you have questions for Terrell, we'll do Q&A at the end of the presentation, so you can go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will do our best to answer as many of those as possible. So go ahead and take it away, Terrell.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, creating characters, creatures for the entertainment industry, but also for publishing, for science illustration, just all across the board. And it's one thing to, be able to know the anatomy of an animal, but there's another thing in combining that animal with personality, and that makes all the difference, whether it's for science illustration or for designing for um, an animation series. And so let me click on my correct screen here to activate that. All right, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly and go to the images. And here we go. So I'm going to design using the human body, because we're all familiar as humans with ourselves, and this is kind of where we start, at least that so many artists start, with studying human physiology and life drawing and all of that. And so if I had an assignment where I was going to create a mythological creature, let's say a satyr, and in Greco-Roman mythology, that is a woodland deity that is generally half goat and half human. But I want to take more of a biological approach to it, not a magical approach. And so what would that look like if you mix the DNA of two different species? So here we have a human being, and you can see how the basic way to break down the anatomy. And then you can do the same thing with a goat. And you can also see that there are similarities, a lot of similarities between human and goat anatomy. We all have elbows, ankles, shoulder blades, all of that they have in common. So if you mix those two things together, you create a character, you might end up with something like this. And again, I'm taking more of a scientific viewpoint overview, so that when you look at this creature, it's not half human, it's not half goat, but it's an interesting, I hope interesting, blend of both. But then I've also gone the extra step of doing my best to add personality to this creature, in this case, a rather humorous take, and giving him a little accessory, because satyrs are notoriously famous for imbibing wine and all that happy stuff. So that is one way to approach designing a mythological but biologically feasible creature. Let's create another type of satyr. And we'll do this by going to the zoo and sketching. And here's a collection of some of my sketches. And on one side, I've got chimpanzees, in this case, well, actually bonobo. And on the other side, I have squirrel monkeys, because I think squirrel monkeys are so adorable, and I love to draw them doing their thing. So that's my typical way of proceeding, study the real animals first. And here is another example. This is a scientific illustration, actually, of the skeleton of a Mona monkey, a type of African Ganon, very attractive, beautiful little cat-sized monkey. And then here is an anatomical study of a chimpanzee, a biological illustration. This sort of same technique is used when reconstructing prehistoric animals as well. But anyway, this is one way of doing my research and thoroughly understanding the real deal before I launch into something that's imaginary. So here is a satyr, which is using chimpanzee DNA and ibex DNA, and I've kind of gone over the top with the horns and making those horns even extra flamboyant. And you can see it's not all half chimpanzee, it's not half ibex. Ibex, of course, is a type of wild goat. But it's kind of a blend between the two. And I've tried to give it a lot of emotion as well. The emotion of a wild creature as opposed to a sly, more humorous creature. And then I think about, let's think about what if this was an illustration for National Geographic, and we wanted to show this creature in its native environment, what would that look like? It might look something like this. Or I have this animal, I'm thinking it's more of a tree-dwelling satyr, and then I've gotten some horn-billed Archaeopteryx type birds that I've made up, but I've tried to give enough grounding in reality so that we can believe in an animal like this. And this is the approach you take when you're reconstructing prehistoric species like the Tyrannosaurus rex, or if you're designing imaginary creatures for Star Wars or Star Trek. You want the audience to be able to relate to them, to recognize them, to resonate with them so that they can believe in them. Here are some what we call Jabba cuties, a couple of them that I designed for Jabba's Den of Sin and Iniquity for Episode 6 of Star Wars, which was the original trilogy. This was the remastered version. And the one on the left is more of a costume design, but the one on the right is totally a design for a digital character. And you can see that I've been using a lot of human characteristics in the pose and the attitude of the two characters. But again, this is based on real life, real people, and how people act and behave. And you can make the same application with other types of animals, other types of beings. And you can translate human emotions and gestures into creatures like this, like the parents of Jabba the Hutt. These were designed for the Phantom Menace. We have Jabba's father, that's Frank the Hutt on the bottom there, and his mother Gardula the Huttess above, and then in between. I couldn't resist doing baby Jabba, so that's what that is. For another company, I was asked to design ogre-like creatures, and the assignment was, if you could design something that's even more, repulsive than the Hutts, please do so. And this was my answer to that. And again, this is a creature that was inspired by ceratopsian dinosaurs, by cane toads, by tsunami frogs, and deep sea groupers, but yet it's behaving in a very much of a human way. So it's observation of real animals combined with observations of human beings. These are little study sketches of that character and also his consort. Her name is Domissa. She's actually the power, the dominant side of that relationship. And it's always fun to explore behaviors and stuff with these sort of gestural poses. And let me show you a formal picture of Domissa. There she is, Queen Domissa. And she's, she basically rules her world, and she reproduces very similar to that of the Suriname frog, in that the babies emerge pustule-like from her skin. It does not hurt her at all. She just does this all day, is the power behind the politics in that world that she exists in. She likes to drink her little bit of wine at the same time. Very human thing to do. Here are just some more illustrations of Orem and Domissa, and some more conceptual designs from the story. And I've highlighted some of the characters in color so that you can see them better. So we can go right here into paleontological illustration, which is very much a forensic. We are given evidence. Sometimes there's a lot of fossil evidence, sometimes it's just fragmentary bits and pieces, and we have to compare what fragments we have with the closest living relatives in order to give our best guess as to what an extinct or long dead species might have looked like. So we can do this with, here's a good example, in this case, with the Permian era amphibian Diplocaulus. It's kind of a large, well, largish salamander type amphibian, aquatic, basically, lived in ponds and maybe rivers. And it was interesting in that it has these really long horn-like structures off the parietal bones of its skull. And there's I think, quite a bit of, um, of fossil fragments for this in order to actually put a skeleton together, and then from there to apply the same or similar musculature that we see in living um, salamanders and newts. And then from there, we can compose the what we think the living creature might look like. As to the exact color, that's a guess. But we can infer maybe a similar coloration from that of living amphibians that we see today in the world. And here I can show you just so. As a child, I had pet newts. In fact, the red-spotted newts, so I'm familiar with those animals. So there we have the little red-spotted newt. I put the Diplocalus in the same pose, and then you can see there's a top view of it. We have it coming straight on towards us, and then there's some other studies of various salamanders, including the Japanese hellbender and the axolotl. And with all this information, I can then play. I can create kind of a Disney-style animatable character, or I can do kind of a little manga chibi type. But they're all Diplocalus, and they all have their anchors in reality, in nature. And here is a creature that I made up based on the Diplocalus, but I just went quite extravagantly, where I thought, well, gee, let's make those horns even bigger, and then why not add an extra pair of horns on the tail, and then let's make the face a little kind of humorous by giving it kind of a overshot jaw to make it kind of bold and funny at the same time. And then what would that look like in doing something? And here we have kind of a scene where it and its little friends are evading these predatorial salamander-type panther creatures, and it's a whole lot of fun. And that's that same creature, but done very simply. So nature allows you, as a designer, to explore and be really crazy with it, and it's yet still anchoring it into an image that we can, as human beings, relate to and enjoy, hopefully. And we can do things with dinosaurs. Like we all know that T-Rexes like to play football and such. Not really, but you can, when you know the anatomy and you see how crocodiles and stuff and similar animals behave in personality, you can kind of put two and two together and create T-Rexes enjoying playing football and doing kinds of funny things. And then you can also create the incredible, T-Rexosaurus, Hulkosaurus, and kind of a funny little pun where he's really buff and really built, but he still can't scratch his chin. It's just fun to play with nature. Here is a paleontological illustration. This is one of the species of Protoceratops. These animals are related to such animals as Triceratops and Torosaurus. And we have a female here and her little cub. It's always fun to do the babies of any one species, and see how similar or dissimilar they are from the adults. And here is a Protoceratops that was used in a greeting card. And so studying the real thing allows you to design characters. So there's a lot of human attitude and gesture in this beast. And the same applies to animating dinosaurs for fun. We've got this animal is grounded in nature, but yet it's doing very, very much of a human thing. So we're going to talk about a couple other projects. I was hired, to work on Brother Bear as at its early inception, when we were just doing conceptual design for it from Disney. And one of the things, my first jobs for that project was to come up with lots of charts as to the anatomy of actual bears, because Brother Bear is a very naturally handled animated feature. And so the anatomy and the way the fur is constructed was very important to the animators. So this is an example of one of those charts that I did. And then here I'm going to be showing you a lot of the conceptual art that I did in developing the bear characters and some of the other animal characters. And the way Disney works is especially with animal characters and naturally handled productions, is to go work backwards from nature. They'll start with nature first and then edit back towards where they get a more animatable character. So here is some more of the art. And you can see there's just a tiny little bit of anthropomorphism added to the animals. If you look at the bighorn sheep, the doll sheep there, they're talking to the bear and they're slightly smiling, but I didn't have to tweak that too much from the actual animal. And here we go into more development of the bears themselves. So here we can see the bears are pretty, normal looking bears, except when you look at the faces, you see that, oh, they've suddenly developed eyebrows and just a slightly human type of eye. Now this is just a digression into some of my page from some of my sketchbooks. These are very sketchy sketches, and I wanted to show you this as an example of working from nature and observation to directly apply to a character for Brother Bear, which was the Raven. She was eventually dropped from the final production, but there was a lot of work done on her, and I had a lot of fun. But you can see this is a bird that has, you can tell it's a raven. It's got workable wings, feathers that are like any other living raven, but she is doing some very human gestures and behaving like a person. And that's kind of the balance you get in animation, is the balancing in human behavior, human interpretation, and animal behavior and animal personalities. Here is the development of the ground squirrel character. The one on the left is pretty realistic, and you can see as we go towards the right that the character gets a little more humorous. And I don't know about you, but I have never in the wild seen squirrels wringing out their tails after a rainstorm or getting dunked. And you can see here even more editing in as far as characters go. You can see how that ground squirrel has become, in effect, a Disneyfied character, as has the bear, and then here is a totally Disneyfied ground squirrel. I did a lot of work on the moose brothers. I just love to draw a moose. They're such Pleistocene looking deer. They're just pretty amazing. And you can see how even so they are becoming refined and edited as far as the facial characters go. Characteristics go. And I'm here working pretty closely with the script. And I think the really only major design addition to the moose were essentially making their feet a little furrier. But you can see with the bears towards the bottom right, that's pretty much the Disney release character for Brother Bear. So that was a lot of fun. And the same treatment was given to the other animals that appeared in that production, from pretty realistic in anatomy studies to the animated character from the films. And you can see that one, an example of what you can see there at the bottom in that caribou. So my book, The Katurin Odyssey, which has been recently republished by Design Studio Press, is a story about a lemur who lives on a planet that's similar to our planet Earth, but it's not our Earth, and it's inhabited entirely by animals, both existing species and prehistoric species. And the lemurs have their own villages and kinds of technologies, which are basically they can build little houses, they can weave little baskets, that sort of thing. And these animals are handled very naturalistically, but they're able to do certain things, as I mentioned, like build little villages and such. Here is a character study of the main character, Katurin the lemur, in kind of a sad mood. And that's what I mean by a slight little bit of anthropomorphism there. You can see a rather human sadness in his face. He's very naturalistically handled, but yet you can see that he's feeling sad. Here is a study of one of the more devious characters, and some more illustrations from the book. These animals, colobus monkeys don't actually read, nor do they wear spectacles, but they actually do have the physical ability to hold a book and to wear spectacles. And so in this story, all the animals are able to do things that they physically could theoretically do. Here's some sketches from my sketchbooks, my favorite animals. And my favorite animals to draw are horses. Anything that resembles a horse, so I will draw. I love to ride. Try to do that every day. That is, draw and ride every day. And just an example of reality informing illustrations. So this is Quigga the Quagga, one of the main characters in the Katurin Odyssey, and he becomes Katurin the lemur's best friend as they go on this journey together. There's Quigga the Quagga, and Katurin, and then another little character called Sia the mouse deer. And just another view from the top looking down. And here's a spread from the book. The book was designed so that all the spreads are done in film aspect ratio, the same aspect ratio that you would see for the big screen in cinema and also your widescreen smart television. So the book is a cinematic novel rather than a graphic novel, and it hopefully reads like a movie. It's fully illustrated. Check it out, Design Studio Press. I'm shameless in promoting it. All right, let's go back to Star Wars. Okay, so we have a contrast between two characters. We've got Jar Jar Binks and we've got Sebulba. And the reason I'm showing you this particular image is to see differences in a character design. One that's pretty happy-go-lucky, cheerful. Another one who's just altogether sour grapes, and just nasty and mean and grumpy. And you can see that in the two faces. One has rather rounded, happy eyes, kind of a cheerful orangish color, and the rest has, kind of squinting eyes, and he's just all, it looks like he's eating a lemon, basically. And it's interesting, so that when you're designing characters, you will often design their physiognomies to reflect their inner souls, so to speak, their interior lives. And you can see that even within a species, here are two Gungans. We obviously see Jar Jar on the right, and then the long-suffering Sergeant Tarkles, who is just totally world-weary and really just had it with Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar was designed to annoy all the other characters in the Phantom Menace. That was intentional, and I think he succeeded. These are characters that were designed for young adult novels for the Star Wars universe. These are book jackets, and we can see determination in the features of the creature on the left. The one in the middle is a rather devious pawn artist, and the one on the right is a noble royal type, a princess type. And it's just, these are just showing different emotions, different character types, and the feeling that we want to get from them. So when you're designing characters, you're also being an actor. You're keeping in mind, what are their personalities? What story are they telling? What is their role in the story? And how does the audience understand that? These are characters from video game design. And this is often when you're designing for a video game, the budgets can be limited. And so there's only a certain amount of polygon space available in the budget. In other words, the skeleton has to be if each character basically has to be the same with certain tweaks. But you can, convey different character types by certain adjustments. For example, you can give in coloration of the fur. The one on the left is kind of a princely type. He's also got some aspects of blue on him. Blue often is symbolically can connote wisdom or nobility or good guy aspects. It's no mistake that the Star Wars characters who are good have blue lightsabers, while the ones who are bad have red lightsabers. The middle one is more of a warrior type. He has a warmer, sanguine coloration. And the one on the right is more of a sidekick type. You can he's a little bit different. He's got shorter ears. He's got lots of splotches. And so we can make distinctions just by subtle changes. And you can do the same thing with nemesis types and wise, jolly people by making this a little fatter, and then we can have fierce, more maybe stout and stocky, short people. You can do all kinds of things using basically the same model, the same skeleton, and just altering certain things to connote character. And if you have a little bit of money extra in the budget, you can spend that in designing costuming. And in some cases, in this particular one, some of the costuming even seems to be a part of the body. These are all kind of interesting sort of cat people. All right, so here's a scientific illustration of a female African spotted leopard and her cub there. Here are some zoo studies of pumas. San Diego Zoo. Here are some more studies of mine of pumas, mountain lions, and a domestic Sphinx cat. And so I have all these kinds of studies so that I can understand the animals that I want to portray. Like this one for Disney. This is again for Brother Bear. This character eventually was cut from the final production, but it's kind of a humorous take on a cougar, and he's contemplating, I guess, the remains of his last dinner, doing kind of "Alas, poor York, I knew you well, and you were so delicious." And here's a contrast. Here are two different felines in similar positions, but for two different intentions. The one on the left is for a greeting card, happy lion. And the one on the right is a Smilodon fatalis, a saber-toothed cat, native to the LA region, Southern California region. And that was for a paleontological magazine called Aeon. Okay, and here are just some more studies, contrasts in a wild canine and a very highly domesticated canine. We have the differences between a young fox and a pug puppy about the same age. Interesting. One can clearly survive in the wild better than the other one. The other one survives best on a human lap, I think. And then knowing how to draw a fox enables you to do a fox for illustrations, like this one called Henny Penny. This is Foxy Loxy, the fox. The seahorses there on the left, those are two specimens that belong to me. And then the image on the right is a bookmark. Advertising art, there's a croc in Crocs, and that's my study of a crocodile to the right. More greeting cards. More greeting cards. And this was for a TV production. These are really kind of fierce little domesticated caged birds, and they have ray guns, so they're the bad bird gang. All right, we can take a paleontological approach to creature design. Here's a type of griffin. If you recall the Protoceratops and the leopard, it's kind of like if we combine those two animals and wanted to create a griffin, you might come up with something like this. And studies like this were all involved very much so in designing for the Phantom Menace. Here is those animals in their natural setting and behaving very much like lions squabbling over a kill. Here is the study of one of those Teazor griffin. And then you can play with it. The one image on the lower left, that could be a design for a CG character. The image on the lower right would be suitable for designing for a 2D animated character. And the other two images could be for either or. They're just having kind of fun with that. You can also have fun with other types of images. I just love the artwork of Dr. Seuss. I grew up with reading Dr. Seuss, and one of my favorite characters was the Zans from One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. And I was thinking, what will that animal, what is the animal, what is its closest relative in the real world? I thought probably it's going to be some sort of hartebeest or some sort of wildebeest. And you can see I'm comparing the actual animals with the Zans. And then I thought, well, let's see if I can Dr. Seussian a wildebeest. And at the same time, I put a more natural take on the Zans. And there we go. So I kind of created an animatable character that sort of was inspired very much by Dr. Seuss. And oh, those other two characters are a female Gungan and a Blarth from Star Wars. Getting back to the Katurin Odyssey, we can have real animals doing human behaviors. And we have basically here is the equivalent of, I guess, a tiki bar or a little tavern. And the wildebeest and the spiny anteater, they're two con artists who are trying to trick the lemur into doing something he shouldn't. And I love to draw wildebeest because they're just such nutty animals. And here is Tiki wildebeest. He's a very happy wildebeest because I think he's had too many Mai Tais, which is why he can see all those blowfish swimming around. Here's another animal from the project Tales of Amalfia. This bear-like creature is the size of a Asian elephant. It eats about anything. And then there's that character in a setting having a conversation with its fellows. There's a close-up of its face. And here's that same animal, but for a different type of purpose. You can have that very fierce animal sell cereal. You can have it go to an anime convention. You can have it being crazy. You can have it do anything you want to, but it's all anchored in reality. You can do the same thing with this rather noble character here. It's rather antelope dinosaurian combo, I guess you could say. Very fierce and noble. And really just have a lot of fun. So as a creature designer, I don't just do very, very realistic stuff, but I'm called to do very exaggerated animatable characters. I had this one here simply because I like it. And then there's that those very noble characters like Roman gladiators in the conflict. And even some graphic design. We have a little bit of Art Nouveau in here. There's that flying greyhound creature. Let me show you in color a scene. This was actually an adult coloring book that was designed for Tales of Amalfia. And this image appears in Principles of Creature Design, I believe. And it's just an example of illustration using traditional devices to create a graphic device, a cartouche. There's those same animals, but in a more of a happy animated character type. Now, caricatures are interesting because not only are you designing a character that combines maybe some humanish personality and animal body, but there's another layer in that it's a caricature on top of that of perhaps the person who is voicing that character. One of the best examples is Disney does this so very well. It's from the Jungle Book. And George Saunders, he voiced the character Shere Khan, the tiger. But you can also see that Shere Khan is a caricature of George Saunders. Not only is he using his voice, but also his mannerisms, and you can see in the face somewhat as well. Well, I had the opportunity to do some of this playing around with actually one of my favorite television series when I was growing up. You may or may not be familiar with this, but those who are older among you will probably recognize this. So I loved watching Dark Shadows as a kid, and actually I have seen all 1,200 episodes. And basically it was a gothic daytime drama that had vampires and witches and people doing just absolutely horrible things to one another. But the interesting thing about doing caricatures, in the case of Dark Shadows, is that the actors had very distinctive faces. And that helps a lot. So we have here Barnabas Collins, the vampire, and then we have his wife, Angelique, the witch, who is adorably evil. And so I did a study of their faces in here to try to decide how would that translate into animals. So if you just changed a couple of letters, say from Barnabas Collins to Barnabas Collie, you can end up with some interesting things going on. So I tried to preserve the elegance that Jonathan Fred, who played Barnabas Collins, into Barnabas Collie. So I did kind of a rather elegant type, although rather perplexed dog here. And then Angelique, translated, I think, pretty easily into a very adorably evil cat. And then, of course, the other characters were fun to do, too. And let me show you a close-up of Barnabas Collie. Here's Barnabas Collie, and I think he's been gnawing on his cane in his coffin. But I've had quite a lot of fun. So hopefully there is some resemblance between the original actor and this particular character. And I had a lot of fun doing this. So it was fun. So when I'm saying everything in the kitchen sink, I'm talking about being able to integrate lots of different styles in certain productions. So here is, again, a study of an elephant. Here's your basic elephant, Asian elephant. Well, you can have all kinds of elephant characters. You can have, the one on the left, you have from Eastern, Southeast Asia. You can have one from Mars or the planet Zoid in the middle. You can have one from, hailing from Africa. You can do all kinds of fun things once you know how to draw a real elephant. And you can bring it to such an extreme that the elephant almost breaks apart. This is about as far as I could go in designing an elephant character without it ceasing to look like an elephant. This is just a really quick scribble of a character. Again, I was inspired by a Dr. Seuss ABC book. Rosie rides a red rhino, and I decided to do Rosie Rah Rah rides a red rhino. These are just fun little creatures I did entirely for myself, just in my sketchbooks. And another creature, Pink Dahlia. I don't know, just because I wanted to. When Pokemon Go was so popular a few years back, I decided I wanted to figure out what Pikachu actually looked like. And so that was what I came up with, kind of a frazzled rabbit / chinchilla / rodent who said, "Please just leave me alone. I'll be good. Stop taking my picture." And here is a scene from a production I worked on called Atomic Soda Pop. This was about, going on 20 years ago. And there's all just a wacky space age world with all kinds of characters and all sorts of different styles. And I had to design all those different styles. Some were more realistic, some were more Hanna-Barbera, but it was a whole lot of fun. And here are some of the characters. And one of them, this is an animation model sheet that I did. So these are fairly realistically rendered characters, and the main characters tend to be a little bit more realistically rendered. Kind of a dragon. This is one of the storyboards. And some of the supporting characters tended to be maybe a little bit more wacky and wild. We have some beatniks here. And of course, you have to have a space tigress. What production would be complete without space tigress? And here's some more crazy creatures. These are the Moo Preems in their Moo Maid act. And we have the British invasion, too. And a couple of years ago, it was the 150th anniversary of the publication of Alice in Wonderland. And so I did some artwork for an animation conference. Here's a detail from that. It was also when one of the new Star Wars movies was coming out. So there's the Jabberwocky. And then here's the poster with the actual Jabberwocky for that. This Creative Talent Network, CTNX Animation Exposition. These are more sketches from my sketchbook, which allows me to do cat characters. This is a easy to read corporate logo designed by cats, starring themselves. And these cats are from the Pacific Northwest, and so naturally they love to drink coffee. And in this particular production, these cats have a little art advertising agency, and there's these various muses of great animal artists that inspire them. These are some of the sketches for these. And so we have Andy Narwhal, who has invented the Narkini. We have Leopardo and his famous painting, The Pony Lisa. We have Miko Antelope. And of course, we have to have Vincent van Gogh. He tends to eat his masterpieces. These are just some sketches of swine and a little pony. And of course, this is Picasso and his famous painting, The Old Guitar Fish. These are horse studies, which enables me to do things like, I digress. Here's a realistic Chesbosky's horse on the left, and then the stylized view on the right. And then I will conclude with this illustration that was designed for another particular Comic-Con in Canada, Calgary. And this is Epona, the horse goddess. She is the goddess that the ancient Celts worshipped. And this is my interpretation. And so that's my conclusion of my presentation.
Thanks, Terrell, so much for that. All those pieces were amazing. I had to turn my microphone off because I was cackling at some of the puns you had for the artist illustrations, especially Vincent van Gogh. That was probably my favorite thing ever.
I'm glad you like them.
You had such a real breadth of work. What have been some of your biggest inspirations, in creating these creatures, and also as just science illustration?
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, nature is my biggest inspiration. But as far as I'm inspired by many artists as well. But I think that there's maybe three main artists that I've always been inspired by from my earliest childhood. And Two are deceased and one is still living. But they are William D. Barry, who did a lot of beautiful artwork and illustrations for field guides. He's probably best known for his drawings and artwork of Alaskan wildlife. Just gorgeous drawings. And then there's Bob Kuhn, and his last name is spelled Kuhn, just a magnificent wildlife artist. He really felt and breathed and conveyed wild animals and just almost in an effortless way. He was an illustrator for about 30 years before going into fine art. Just wonderful, beautiful stuff. But I think from my earliest childhood, the artist that inspired me the most was J.H. Matterns or Maternus. He is still living, and he did the beautiful uh, paintings of the Cenozoic mammals for the Smithsonian Institution. I grew up just poring over reproductions, in National Geographic and Time Life books over those murals. And I would say that his artwork was what formed me at the earliest, because I loved that ever since saw them at age 4, and they always stayed in my brain. And so that scientific way of being able to beautifully interpret fossils through the lens of nature and to make them seem real, that's inspires me to this very day.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm gonna embarrass you a little bit, but I feel very much the same about you. I mean,
Oh,
watching, as a kid when I saw Star Wars Episode 1 and then getting your book, the way that are able to breathe life into these characters that you create is, there's a difference between motion and having your characters feel alive. I think a
mm,
lot of that for me has to do with the way that you color your creatures too, or
mm.
like there's spark to them, and I think you use watercolor for a lot, correct?
Actually, I have used watercolor, yes. And then many of these, simply because it saves so much time, I use a lot, like Copic markers or high-end markers, and they can convey either a watercolor look or they can convey a Photoshop look, which makes them very adaptable if I'm going to do cleanup in Photoshop on top of that. So yeah, but the nice thing about them, or markers like those, is they convey spontaneity and they're very fast, very fast.
That's awesome. So, are you ready for some questions from our audience?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So, folks, I've got a few questions lined up, but if you still have questions for Terrell, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So, our first question we have up today is from Five Twits Hello. They're saying, Terrell, what art medium do you use when you make your creature drawings? Which I think you kind of answered a little bit.
Yes, um, I can go a little bit more detail. Like so many of my peers, we tend to often start out not necessarily, I know that many people nowadays or will start out using sketching on a tablet and stuff, which is what you can do. But I found that most of my peers and myself will start out just on copier paper or tracing paper sketching. It's like just copier paper, and so there's something precious about it. And then you get to a particular level, think, okay, this is working, and then you can either go digital or you can. I usually then will maybe sketch it in more detail on tracing paper. Then I will make a digital copy, and I will use that to either scan that into Photoshop and color it there, or I will color it in markers, one of the two. Whatever is fastest, I will do. I've actually found for myself that doing it in marker initially is faster, unless I have to do a character that's going to have lots of layers. Then I'll go into Photoshop. It depends upon what the needs of the client is.
Cool. Let's see. This question is from Natalie, asking, how do you go about reconstructing muscles on extinct animals? How do you know how big or small certain muscles are?
Okay, so if you have the skeleton, um, there are what's called muscle scars on the various bones, which indicate where the muscles originate and where they insert. So a muscle will say originate from the bottom edge of the scapula. Let's say we're talking about the triceps, big thick muscle in most vertebrate animals. And so it'll originate there and it'll insert into the elbow area. And there are scars on either of those that indicate where those are. And, the distance between the elbow and the scapula determines how large or how long that particular muscle will be. And that's how you know what sizes they are. And you have nature to be a great example. For example, if I was going to reconstruct an ancient giraffe, like a Cephalotherium, well, this animal is a little more stout, a little more robust in build than let's say, a Rothschild's giraffe or a Maasai giraffe that we see today. However, they're fundamentally similar in all the essentials. And so I would simply be looking at the musculature of an actual living giraffe um, and adapting it to fit the skeleton of the extinct Cephalotherium. And so nature is your model. You interpolate. That's how you do that.
That's really cool because like today's purpose is to have our audiences realize the connection between science and art and how they work together. And for a lot of folks at home who could be like, I don't really care about science that much, or they're like, science isn't for me. If they're
Mm-hmm.
drawing and illustrating, that's another form of science, and that's just in a different way. And hopefully they can
Yeah,
notice that.
it is. Um, there's a ton of creativity in being a scientist. In order to be a good scientist, you have to be able to imagine. You have to be able to do that, to be able to imagine and pose the right questions. And then you have to imagine, okay, I've got this idea. How do I design or imagine an experiment that will tell me whether my idea, has any legs or not? I mean, it's a lot of imagination.
It's true. I know, like, one of my good colleagues is in the chat today, Ian Trevathan, and he works at a paleontology museum. He's a scientist, but he uses his imagination to recreate like creatures from Star Wars and make sculptures to teach
Mm-hmm.
science as well. And so there's
Yeah.
a really great connection there.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, here's another question from Bailey Jorgensen. Hi, Terrell. Do you have an original creature design that is your favorite, or the one that you are most proud of?
Oh my goodness. Well, if we're talking about movies I've worked on, gee, there's so many, it's all a blur. One of my favorites, however, I think if we're going to talk about Star Wars, my most favorite design was the Sando Aqua Monster.
Yes.
Yes, because it's like, oh wow, I get to design this huge, huge creature that could eat Godzilla for lunch, you know, and uh, and that was my favorite one. And again, that creature is based on real life creatures and based mostly on tigers. The way it behaves, the way it slinks around, it's sneaky, it's at the top of the food chain, and it creeps up on you and grabs you, and then it eats you alive. So it's like a tiger.
I love that so much. I mean, for me, the Sando Aqua Monster is probably one of my favorite creatures from Star Wars too. I remember being 10 years old watching them go through the Nubian trenches, and
Yeah,
then the Sando Aqua Monster comes out, and I was just in awe of like that thing's huge, but it looked like a whale cat, and my mind was just racing with questions. So I'm really
yeah,
happy that you said it was the Sando Aqua Monster.
yep. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. This one is from Kimberly asking, I used to work for Disney. How long do you work with Disney for character study concepts?
Well, it depends upon the needs of the production. Sometimes I've been called in to consult if they have a particular problem they want to, consult. I did that with horses for the beautiful imaginary horse in Frozen. And but other productions, for example, Brother Bear, I worked on that movie for over a year, and that was there from almost the get-go. We were wanting to work very carefully with the characters, keep them as natural as possible, and yeah, so it just varies. It can be case by case.
When it comes to those kind of projects for the science illustrators, or not science, just the illustrators and the concept designers, do you all work together or like take classes to like better understand anatomy and work together with like scientists through the whole process?
Let's see. Obviously, we can't know everything, yes, I would say so. I know Disney does that. They will have scientists or experts in animal physiology come into the studio and work with their artists, their conceptual artists and animators. I believe that Dr. Habib has done that. He did that with Lord of the Rings and Smog and other productions. And yeah, so the major studios will bring in experts. They will also often bring in, or Disney used to do this traditionally, bring in actual real animals and their handlers to draw from.
That's cool. Just I can't imagine like trying to sketch like while there's like a bear or something right in front of you.
Yeah.
Let's see. This one is from Sharkmoon17. Do you have any recommendations for getting a foot in the door with an art or science illustration field? Do you have any tips for drawing from life at zoos? I know there can be a lot of movement.
Drawing from zoos, yes, indeed. That's always the challenge. Is animals will move around. They won't hold 20-minute poses like we do in life drawing class. The best thing for drawing in zoos is you just basically getting gestures. You're getting gestures of the animals in various poses, various ways that they're walking. But a good thing to do is to wait until the animal is sleeping or chewing its cud. Or if you're going to draw lions, visit them when they're eating or have just eaten, because when after they've just finished eating, they're going to just lay around like pythons basically. And or if you've seen like sheep or antelope, uh, when they're chewing their cuds, they're content, they want to be still. With other more active animals, say like horses or zebras that don't chew the cud, it's basically sketching them. If you can catch them dozing, that's a good thing to do. Or if they're grazing, just realize they'll graze there and they'll walk a little bit more and they'll graze some more. Those are good animals to draw from. Reptiles are fairly easy to do because usually reptiles will be pretty still. And if you're drawing fish in an aquarium, keep in mind that fish will have a pattern in swimming. If you don't get the entire fish as it comes down in one direction, it'll turn and it'll come back again. And it'll come back again. And it's just patience with yourself, realizing that sketches in zoos are not going to be perfect. Some will be better than others, but you're learning and trains your brain to really observe about the animal. As far as the scientific illustration career, a good thing to do to network as far as getting contacts would be to become a member of the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators. That's gnsi.org. They're a great resource. They have conferences and local chapters and connections with museums and other institutions. And of course, you can always apply and show your portfolio directly to those institutions. But that's a really good way to get started.
Awesome. Here's a question from Rob Soto, who is actually one of our previous Alf Museum interns and will be joining us in our panel for Careers in Science Illustration later today.
Oh,
Rob's
great.
asking, hey Terrell, how do you deal with artist block or feeling burnt out during a long project? Any tips for staying motivated and on track when you are self-employed?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Um, you kind of there's a level where, gee, this design looks like the last design I just drew, 5 minutes, today. really the thing that I have to do for myself is physically get out of the studio, go outside, do something else, give yourself a break. In my particular case, I have two horses, and I work really hard all day, and then I go ride them. Either I'm in a schooling session or I'm taking a lesson on them, and that just changes my whole. It refreshes me. So whatever it could be, for some people it might be walking your dog, it might be taking a walk, going for a jog, getting out, or even just getting out of your seat, going downstairs, whatever it is, and making a cup of coffee, and just like, okay, you gotta like take those necessary breaks to recharge. Um, you just have to do that. That really helps me.
Great advice. Let's see. This one is from CJ Ellison asking, if you're coming from an art background instead of science, how do you get started in science illustration?
Well, a good thing to do is if you're interested in science, love dinosaurs. Find Just continue to read and research and learn as much as you can about dinosaurs and draw dinosaurs. If you're totally interested in birds or insects, well, then that's something that you can focus in. So, what is it about the sciences that excites you? Because you'll be drawn naturally to that. I mean, look at all the David Attenborough documentaries you possibly can. That's a great way to get started. If you will naturally start to become familiar with scientific lingo if you're doing that, because if you're interested in dinosaurs and reading books about dinosaurs, that's gonna that's gonna come up um, naturally. If you're interested in zoology, you read about animals and you learn, oh, this is what the scientific name means. This is a genus. This is a species. It almost comes about by absorption because you're already interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, like, just kind of immersion, right? Like,
Immersion, yeah, absolutely. Like Equus ferus is the the scientific name for horse. It means actually wild horse. The scientific name for the domestic horse is Equus ferus cavalos, means wild horse that can be ridden. It's pretty interesting the way that Latin and Greek binomials work.
oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things about science. Some people come up with really cool names.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of that, this one's from Martin asking, what is your favorite prehistoric creature?
Ah, geez, Louise, that's a hard one. Um, I've always I've always wanted to see Eohippus, the little dawn horses, because I would love to own one and have one and pet it. So that's one of them. I think some of the ichthyosaurs are pretty cool. The dolphin shaped marine reptiles. Some of them got really, really big as well. Golly, there's so many that I enjoy and love. Some of those long-necked camels are pretty amazing. I tend to I tend to veer towards the prehistoric mammals myself.
Yes, thank you. Let's see. This one comes from Ian Trevathan again, who I'd mentioned earlier. He's saying, asking, trying to convey an experience is my goal with crazy things that I build. Do you ever get stuck on something that you just can't get quite right? How do you overcome this challenge?
Yeah, that happens sometimes. I might have the overall in my mind's eye idea for, oh, this is going to be a really cool idea, but I've only thought about the impression of it, and then when I'm starting to draw it, like I might spend, you know, hours like just getting that hind leg right. And again, if I'm not getting it quite right, I think, let's go just take a break. I need to get away from the studio and do something else. And you know, oh look, I look at my horse's hind like, oh, there it is. The answer is right there. But basically, I have to remove myself from the situation if it's causing frustration and just give myself a break.
Really good advice. I know I have to do that quite often too. Ian said he is making an exhibit called Dragons. He's building dragons for a mythology to paleontology exhibit. So
Ooh.
sounds like he might be needing some of that inspiration for that later.
Yeah.
Let's see. This one is from Garant, and we're probably only going to do a couple more questions.
Okay.
There's so many great questions in the chat today. Garant is asking, according to you, is it essential to work digital art, or a good traditional portfolio can be okay for applying for jobs?
Either or both. My background is a traditional artist. I have never hurt for not getting jobs, and I tend to work maybe a little bit tread digitally, where I will start out traditionally and maybe finish digitally. But if your portfolio is all traditional, that's fine too. It's the quality that counts, and as long as you can make the deadline, well, then that's all well and good. I mean, even today, doing conceptual artwork um, for the latest Star Wars movies that my colleagues have been working on, they've been using watercolor, pastels, digital, whatever works, the whole thing together. So, and the interesting thing is, if you're a good traditional artist, then that translates into digital. It's not so easy the other way around. If you're a digital artist, but you've never experienced watercolors or pastels or oil or acrylic, that's harder for you. That tends to be harder for you to learn. But a traditional artist can pretty much, once they understand the basic tools of Photoshop or Procreate or whatever it is, can pretty much slide into it pretty easily. So traditional artist informs you a lot because you understand how light works, you understand how paint works, you understand how the real world works. The same thing how nature informs your creature designs.
Oh, that's awesome. You think you've inspired me to try to my hand at watercolor again.
Yeah.
Here is our last question. This one's from Rayleigh. Hello, I'm in college right now with the hopes of getting a career in scientific illustration. What is some advice you have for someone trying to get into the field? Which I think is a great way to end the talk today.
Yeah, of course, the advantage that you'll have if you have a science background, you are familiar with um, obviously the scientific lingo, how scientists tend to view the world, what they need, what type of artwork they need. Um, and then I would, definitely build your skill set in both traditional and digital art. I would say in both areas. There are programs in science illustration at certain schools. One that I'm very familiar with is at the program at California State University at Monterey Bay. They have a really in-depth scientific illustration program that I believe you can take um, um, after you get your BA or your BS. And you might want to check that one out. It's offered, I think, also at Rhode Island School of Design, I think, but I know for sure at Monterey Bay.
Yeah, the Monterey Bay one's awesome because all of our previous science illustration interns have come through that program. Hannah, who was just on before you, is from there, who's amazing, and pretty much everybody else has been through there. So it's a great program from my own experience.
There you go. And they have contacts, obviously.
Oh yeah. So if anyone goes through that program, you might be able to work at the Alf Museum in the future.
Yay!
Well, I think that does it for our event today, or this presentation today. So thank you so much, Terrell, for joining us. This was an awesome talk, and I've actually learned a lot about science illustration.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you for the honor. I so much enjoyed being here.
For all of our audience today, thank you so much for participating and all the great questions. There were some questions that weren't answered, but for folks who want to like get in touch with you or learn more about your work or keep up with like some of the books that you have coming out or that video game, where can they go to keep up with that?
Well, one place you can go if you do have a question you want to ask me is my website on ArtStation, and that would be www.artstation, that's all one word, A-R-T station, slash Terryl Whitlatch, no, www.artstation.com/Terryl Whitlatch. That's a good way to get in contact with me, and you can see, the newest artwork on my portfolio there. And of course, then there's Instagram and Facebook that you can find me at, and that would probably be the best way to get in contact with me.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we put all of that in the description below. So again, thank you all so much for joining us for this. Making Monsters Discovery Day Online continues at 4 p.m. with our Careers in Science Illustration virtual panel, again featuring all of our former science illustration interns from the Monterey Bay illustration program. And we'll see you then. Until then, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the world of paleontology. And thank you all so much for joining. We'll see you later today.